Hello and welcome to upheld Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on upheldnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Welcome to the upheld Podcast. We have today Dr. Joshua Landis. Dr. Landis, Director at the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and he has a long-running blog on Syria, which is called Syria Comment. Welcome to the program, Dr. Landis.
Well, Ilhan Tanir, it's always a pleasure being with you.
Pleasure is ours. Last time we talked, about 2 months ago, it was immediately after President Trump said that U.S. is withdrawing the troops from Syria. It has been 2 months now. U.S. soldiers are still on the ground, but there was a Sochi meeting yesterday. Can you give us what is your reading of this Sochi summit so far?
Well, all of the main Sochi powers, that's Iran, Turkey, and Russia, of course, try to meet every several months in order to reaffirm and to move forward on an agreement. And the primary agreement here is about Idlib. That's the pressing matter today, is this province of Syria, a fairly large province, which has between 2 to 3 million people in it, many of them refugees, and many fighters that have been pushed up into that area as the Syrian government reconquered the country. Those fighters today have been largely subsumed by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS as it's usually called, which used to be Nusra, is led by al-Jawlani, this jihadist fighter who worked with al-Qaeda in the past, was in Iraq. And the US and Turkey both, and Russia, of course, see him and his organization as a terrorist organization, which is a point of real friction, because Turkey does not want Russia and the Syrian army to invade Idlib province and drive those jihadists and fighters into Turkey, into Anatolia, along with presumably tens of thousands of refugees and innocent people and family members. And this would cause real chaos in Turkey, and it could lead many of them to flee into Europe, which of course the Europeans do not want. And the Americans in the past have threatened Syria not to do this. But with America withdrawing, it opens up the question of what's going to happen in Idlib again. And also, the question is opened because HTS has conquered all the more moderate militias that had been working with Turkey in the past. And this leaves a stark problem for Turkey, which has not upheld its part of the agreement, according to Russia, which was to help the more militant groups like HTS withdraw from a buffer zone and ultimately to lay down their arms.
I understand. And yesterday during the press conference, Mr. Erdogan was talking about the buffer zone that Turkey has been advocating, and Mr. Trump also appeared to be supporting some kind of safe zone through his tweets, but we still don't know what kind of a safe zone he is advocating for. What is your understanding? It looks like at NATO summit in Munich, also that safe zone is being discussed, but also the Eastern Bloc, Russia and Iran have their own ideas about the safe zone. Do you see any real actor, influential actor involved with Syria right now supporting Turkish version of buffer zone?
No one does. And of course, you're absolutely right. President Trump reassured Erdogan in December 14th on their phone call that he was going to withdraw and that Turkey would have a safe zone and be able to enter into North Syria in order to continue to destroy ISIS. And President Trump stated this, that Turkey would destroy and continue the mission to destroy ISIS, which seemed to be carte blanche for Turkey's entrance into North Syria. Of course, we presume that President Trump doesn't understand the dynamic between Turkey and the Kurds and the YPG. his generals and his national security people immediately jumped in and began to contradict the president and said, we're not going to withdraw so fast. Turkey should not come in to Syria. This would lead to the destruction of the YPG. And the YPG, of course, were very worried that they would face the full brunt of the Turkish army. So that possibility of a Turkish-controlled buffer zone of 20, 30 kilometers inside Syria has been pushed back. And we just heard Votel, that the leading American general dealing with this issue, the chief of staff, say to Congress yesterday that he would not have given the order to withdraw, that it was premature, that ISIS cannot be dealt with in this way. And then he talked about the YPG, that America cannot withdraw until the YPG is strong enough to deal with ISIS on its own. Of course, he didn't mention that Syria and the Russians are eager for America to withdraw. So is Iran. In fact, after Sochi, all the powers, Turkey, Iran, and Russia, could agree on one thing, which is U.S. withdrawal is good. And after that, they disagreed. But Russia, Iran, and the Syrian army are hoping that the withdrawal of the U.S. will lead to their filling the vacuum. They want to move up there and obviously offer Turkey some guarantees about dismantling YPG, subsuming it to the Syrian army under its control, and being able to police the border. Syrian government has referred repeatedly to the Adana, what's called the Adana Agreement of 1998, I believe, in which Turkey was, after Öcalan was turned out of Syria due to Turkish pressure, Turkey and Syria came to an agreement whereby Turkish troops could penetrate 5 kilometers into Syrian territory, chasing YPG, but that the Syrian government would undertake the effort to control the YPG on its side and make sure that there were no Kurdish attacks across the border, that the YPG and the Kurds of Syria would not supply arms or aid to the PKK in Turkey. And that's clearly what the Syrian government and the Russians and the Iranians are hoping to reestablish that agreement on the border. So yes, nobody wants the Turkish army to move into Syria except for Turkey. And it seems that there is some cooperation to prevent that.
Actually, there are real credible economists in Turkey. They also argue that Turkish economy is not in a place that can manage another intervention, which will be kind of open-ended 400 kilometers over the northeastern Syria. Yesterday at the press conference, Mr. Erdogan seemed very easy when he was criticizing Mr. Trump and US, but he looked, or his words were very calculated when he was talking about buffer zone or anything involved with Russia or Iran. In your view, how is the Syrian Kurdish, Syrian Kurds are doing? Are they any closer to get some kind of agreement with a Syrian regime? Do you think we should be expecting now Syrian regime to replace Americans, or the international force that Americans are talking can be done via Western allies to replace U.S. soldiers?
Indeed, we don't know. There haven't been any leaks that I know of about the talks that are ongoing between the YPG leadership and the Syrian Democratic Forces, as they're called, and which have been meeting in Russia and a meeting in Damascus. We've heard some people say that they're on track and this sort of thing, but the gap between the YPG and the Syrian government is very, very wide. The Syrian government does not really want to offer the Kurds any real political autonomy or military autonomy. It wants the YPG to be completely subsumed to the Syrian military leadership. There is talk about some kind of cultural autonomy, schools being able to teach Kurdish, but whether that would be a primary language or a secondary language it's hard to believe that Syria's Ba'athist regime would allow Kurds to use Kurdish as the dominant language in their schools, which is the situation today under American zone. So it's hard to see how this agreement is going to come about unless Turkey really pressures and threatens to come in. And I think that's part of the reason why Erdogan is threatening. And because he wants to scare those Kurds and the YPG to make very serious concessions to the Syrian army. And undoubtedly, the Syrian army may be gratified by some of that pressure in its negotiations with the YPG, the ongoing negotiations. So this is a very fraught and difficult negotiations. The Americans, from what we know, are not helping those negotiations. They have recommended to the Kurds not to make a deal with the Syrian government. And in fact, every pronouncement by U.S. generals never mentions the role that the Russian and Syrian army will undoubtedly take in policing against ISIS. They always say, well, we can't withdraw until the YPG is ready to fight ISIS on its own, as if Syrian government will allow YPG to act on its own, which it won't, of course. And so all sides, I think, are denying a reality here. And they're pretending that somehow they're going to come into control and maintain control over North Syria. The Americans pretend that the Syrian army is not going to supplant them. The Turks are pretending that they're going to be able to move into North Syria and control the YPG. And the Syrian government and Russians are assuming that America's going to actually withdraw and that they're going to get a deal with Turkey and that the YPG is willingly going to put down their guns and they're going to resume control over an integral Syria.
I understand very, very different positions. We'll see how the Syria crisis will develop. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Joshua Landis, who has a long-running blog on Syria called Syria Command. Talk to you soon again in another program.
My pleasure.